The day I first heard the words demonic possession applied to my medical condition was the day I realized I'd stumbled into a community far more peculiar than I ever imagined. I had moved into Arcadia Springs, a quiet development punctuated by immaculate lawns, shimmering SUVs, and neighbors who always had a friendly wave at the ready. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect place to settle. The Homeowners Association had a few rules. Sure, bins had to be off the curb by 8 a.m., mailboxes painted a uniform beige, that sort of thing. Nothing outrageous compared to the horror stories I'd heard about other overbearing HOAs. I thought I'd found a haven. I remember that first evening in my new home. A 2-story stucco with a wide front porch and just enough yard to let my rescue dog, Penny, run around. As twilight fell, I was on the porch sipping iced tea when a slender woman in a neatly ironed blouse came sauntering over. She introduced herself as Patricia Wilkins, the HOA president. With her close-cropped hair, high cheekbones, and an air of absolute authority, Patricia gave off the vibe of someone who believed deeply in the power of her own convictions. I noticed she held a clipboard in her arms like an arsenal of rules ready to be fired at the unsuspecting. She was pleasant at first. She asked me about my job. I work freelance, editing manuscripts for small publishing houses. My interests, I love gardening and classical music, and whether I had any experience living in a deed-restricted community, I did not. Then Patricia launched into a diatribe about the importance of maintaining community values. She talked about the principles that Arcadia Springs had been founded on, the sense of unity and neighborly harmony they had all cultivated, and how any disruption, no matter how minor, had to be addressed quickly before it took root. There was something in the way she said that last phrase, took root, that made me think of a plague or a creeping weed. I brushed off the odd turn of phrase, chalking it up to a quirk. "I noticed your dog earlier," Patricia remarked, scanning her clipboard. "It's cute. Rescue, right?" I nodded, feeling an uneasy twinge in my stomach. "Yes, her name's Penny." "Wonderful. We love animals here," she said, though her tight smile hinted otherwise. "We just ask that you keep your yard free of any unpleasant debris. Image is everything, you understand." Her face didn't match her upbeat words, but I told myself I was probably reading too much into it. After all, it was my first day. I thanked her for the introduction, assured her I would keep the lawn pristine, and watched her walk briskly back to her home, a tidy ranch house half a block away. Penny trotted up next to me, and I patted her head, thinking, well, at least we'll have interesting neighbors. In truth, I'd hoped Arcadia Springs would be a place where no one would single me out or pry too deeply. I have a neurological condition that causes me to experience seizures occasionally. Managing it can be tricky. I have medication to keep them under control, but there's never a guarantee. I've grown used to people reacting with fear or misunderstanding when they see me have a seizure. My old neighborhood handled it with compassion and quiet support, but it still felt as though I carried a sign above my head that read, "Fragile." I wanted a fresh start here, under the radar, where I could live in peace without having to explain my private medical history to a bunch of strangers. That facade of peaceful anonymity quickly began to crack as I settled in. First, it was the letters. Every few days, I'd find an envelope in my mailbox with the HOA logo and official-sounding jargon about minor infractions. Not rolling the recycling bin back inside within 30 minutes of pickup. Not trimming my rose bushes to the exact recommended height. Once, I even got a letter about my porch light being too bright at dusk. It was petty, sure, but I chalked it up to an overzealous HOA committee. Then came the neighborhood get-together a few weeks later. Patricia made her rounds, introducing me to everyone as our newest resident, who's adjusting to our standards. It felt more like an inspection than a welcome. The board members, distinguished by their pastel polo shirts, stuck close to each other, nodding in agreement whenever one repeated a rule or shared a complaint. A few neighbors seemed friendlier. One older gentleman, Paul, welcomed me earnestly. A woman named Harriet gave me some cuttings from her aloe plant. Those small acts of kindness kept me from feeling completely alienated. All the while, there was a distinct sense of a watchful eye over everything I did. I'd catch glimpses of Patricia walking by, peering at my yard. I'd see Harriet's curtains flutter at odd moments, as though she stood behind them, trying to glean some piece of information about me. The mailman barely made a sound when delivering letters, as though not to disturb the enforced hush. I started to worry. What happens if I have a seizure in public? Will they slap me with a violation for bringing down property values? It was only a half joke. If the HOA was that strict about trash bins, I couldn't imagine how they'd react to something truly disruptive. Eventually, I stopped trying to guess and decided to just live my life. I couldn't hide forever. If the day came that my medical condition revealed itself, I'd handle it with dignity. After all, most folks are decent once they understand what's going on, right? But Arcadia Springs was no ordinary neighborhood. And the day that I collapsed in front of the HOA board, all my worst fears became real, and then some. Because instead of calling an ambulance, they launched into prayer circles, chanting about demons and malevolent spirits. They tried to exorcise the dark entity from my body as I lay helpless on the manicured grass. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with people who had left reason, compassion, and basic decency behind. And there was nothing in the HOA rules to protect me from what came next. They called it a welcome social, but if you asked me, it felt more like an inquisition with appetizers. The invitation had arrived folded in a crisp, white envelope, instructing me to arrive at the clubhouse on Arcadia Lane at precisely 6 p.m. Casual attire was allowed, it said, but strongly discouraged. Curious to see how the community gathered, I put on my most comfortable pair of black slacks, a simple blouse, and took a deep breath before driving over. The clubhouse sat at the center of Arcadia Springs, a pristine building with large windows that overlooked a koi pond. As I stepped in, I noticed the hush in the air, like the moment just before a high school principal addresses a school assembly. People were clustered in small groups. The board members hovered near the front, behind a banquet table laden with all kinds of pastries and fruit arrangements. Patricia stood in the middle, posture ruler straight, smiling wide and false like an actor rehearsing lines she'd grown tired of. I scanned the room for the few neighbors who had shown me kindness. Harriet was in a corner, her curly gray hair tied in a neat bun. She clutched a purse to her chest and seemed preoccupied, glancing repeatedly toward the front of the room. When she caught my eye, she gave a polite wave, then shifted her gaze to the snacks on the table. Meanwhile, Paul, the older gentleman who'd welcomed me warmly before, was nowhere to be seen. I feared he might have stayed home, uncomfortable with this forced brand of neighborly bonding. Patricia ushered me to the front. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she announced to the crowd. "We're delighted to have our new resident here." Her voice had the practiced warmth of a longtime politician. Arcadia Springs is more than a place. It's a family, a sanctuary, and we want to ensure we bring Marlene into the fold with open arms. "Thank you," I murmured, feeling an odd sense of stage fright. Patricia's grin made my scalp prickle. "I appreciate the welcome." One of the board members, a balding man named Roger, stepped forward. He held a small notepad. "We have a little tradition around here. We call it neighborly confessions." The crowd tittered with delight. My stomach nodded. Patricia's eyes shone. "Yes, you see, we believe in transparency, in trust, in keeping no secrets from one another, so we can truly live in harmony." She extended a hand as though beckoning me to step up to a microphone that wasn't there. "We'd like you to share 3 interesting facts about yourself that nobody else here knows." I hesitated. I could already feel the pressure. Did they expect me to spill my deepest, darkest secrets? The watchers in the crowd looked on eagerly. I tried to speak lightly. "Well, I work as a freelance editor. I love classical piano music, particularly Debussy. And I have a rescue dog named Penny who's half lab, half who knows what." Some in the crowd looked disappointed, as if I'd merely cleared my throat instead of revealing something scandalous. Patricia pressed me. "That's wonderful, dear. Anything else you'd like to share? Something more personal?" My heart hammered. In that moment, I debated whether or not to mention my condition. The last thing I wanted was to be singled out by these people for a medical issue. But their eyes were on me, observant, expectant. A few folks fidgeted. Maybe they wondered why I sometimes seemed distant or cautious. Or maybe they were just hungry for the next tray of mini quiches. I'm fairly private about my life, I said, forcing a smile. But I appreciate this chance to get to know everyone here. And I'm sure we'll learn more about each other over time. Patricia's expression flickered, displeasure, or something close. But she covered it quickly with another polished grin. Of course, we respect privacy to a certain extent. But remember, here at Arcadia Springs, we're a tight-knit community. We like to ensure everyone is safe and accountable. Safe and accountable. The words clung to me like a warning. Unable to stand the tension anymore, I excused myself to refill a cup of punch. Harriet sidled over to me near the refreshment table. Her eyes were full of concern. "They always do that," she whispered. "Don't mind them. Is it always so intense?" I asked. She frowned, then took a cookie from a plate, breaking in half, her gaze flitting around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "Well, Patricia and the board have their convictions. They're not bad people exactly, just set in their ways. They want everything to be perfect here. It's why they moved to a place with an HOA to begin with. Some, like Patricia, take that desire for perfection a little too far." I raised an eyebrow. "Does that include prying into personal matters?" Harriet nodded slowly. "They do more than pry. They get involved, sometimes in ways that are less than helpful. If they suspect something is amiss, they'll swoop in with a solution. But it's rarely the solution you or I might consider rational." Her words carried an undercurrent of warning. But the conversation ended abruptly when Patricia approached, arching a brow. Harriet wandered off, nibbling on her cookie, and I felt Patricia's scrutiny intensify. "Everything all right?" Patricia inquired, too politely. "Just fine," I lied. "Thanks for the warm welcome." She gently touched my arm, the move at once friendly and almost proprietary. "We're here to support you, Marlene," she said. "No matter what you might be facing, no matter your burdens, you don't have to shoulder them alone." It might have sounded caring if not for the edge in her tone that hinted she'd ferret out my secrets whether or not I volunteered them. Later that evening, I escaped the clubhouse with relief pulsing in my veins. I hurried to my car, tossing a last look over my shoulder. Through the windows, I saw Patricia gather the board members, heads bowed as though they were in prayer or plotting. The rest of the guests meandered around, snacking, talking quietly. As I drove home, anxiety gnawed at me. They're going to dig into my life. And if they find out I occasionally have seizures, what then? I had no clue how truly bizarre and dangerous the answer to that question would be, because while I was fretting about a possible stigma or some sternly worded letter, the HOA had something far more invasive in store, something that veered into the territory of madness. I just hoped I'd never give them cause to witness a seizure. But that's the trouble with medical conditions. They don't bend to an HOA's schedule or an individual's desires. It was only a matter of time before Arcadia Springs realized that not all problems can be fixed with a set of regulations or neighborly prayer. And by then, it might be too late for me to simply walk away unscathed. It happened during the annual Yard Beautification Tour, a day meant to celebrate Arcadia Springs' finest lawns and garden displays. The HOA board paraded through the neighborhood, clipboards in hand, awarding shiny ribbons to the most impressive displays of flora. I've been working on my rose bushes, trying to keep them at the required height when the group approached. Patricia led the charge, flanked by Roger and two other board members, their pastel polo shirts like heraldic uniforms in the midday sun. "Lovely roses," Patricia praised, assessing them with a discerning eye. "And your mulch is uniform. I appreciate the attention to detail. You're certainly learning our way." I forced a polite laugh. "I'm trying. I never realized landscaping could be so precise." "The HOA guidelines exist for a reason," Roger piped in. "Uniformity fosters harmony." They moved along to the next house, leaving me with relief and a dash of pride. Maybe if I followed the rules perfectly, they'd leave me alone. Maybe they'd decide I was a model resident, not worth hounding with daily letters. My heart felt lighter at the thought. I joined the group as they progressed through the neighborhood, partly out of curiosity, partly because Patricia insisted it would be good for you to see how we keep standards high. Most yards were indeed immaculate. No stray weeds, no gnomes or pink flamingos. It was so sterile, It almost felt like a movie set. The crowd murmured approvingly at tidy flower beds and well-trimmed hedges. Occasionally, a homeowner would step onto their porch to receive a compliment or a minor critique. The few times the group spotted something amiss, a hint of peeling paint or a garden statue that wasn't in the official approved style, the scribbling on those clipboards became furious. That's when I felt the familiar aura creeping over me, the slight distortion of my vision, the ringing in my ears, the sudden wave of dizziness. I'd had enough seizures in my life to know one was coming. Usually, there's time to find a safe place to sit or lie down. But here I was, in the midst of a roving pack of neighbors. My muscles tensed, my breath became shallow. I tried to remain calm, searching for Harriet's comforting face. The heat of the day pressed in on me. We were in front of a large craftsman house with an immaculate lawn when the seizure tightened its grip. Darkness ebbed at the edges of my vision. My knees gave way. I vaguely recall Harriet shouting my name. Then I was on my hands and knees, my head spinning. Patricia's voice cut through the haze, sharp and alarmed. Someone screamed. Another person cried out, "Call an ambulance." But then there was a flurry of contradictory orders. And that's when the chanting started. It was low at first, almost a hum. I tried to focus my scattered senses on what was happening. As my body trembled, I heard Patricia's voice, urgent, "Gather around. This is not a medical emergency. It's a spiritual crisis." My brain, fuzzy though it was, refused to accept the words. Spiritual crisis? No, I'm having a seizure. I fought to stay conscious enough to speak, to tell them to call 911. But my mouth wouldn't obey. My limbs spasmed. My vision flickered. All I could do was register the swirl of movement around me. I heard Harriet again. "No, we need an ambulance. She's sick, not possessed." Her frantic plea was drowned out by more voices. Roger's baritone boomed. "Evil spirits begone." Like a script from a horror movie, the crowd formed a loose circle around me. My neighbor Linda, someone I barely knew, began intoning a prayer. Another neighbor sprinkled water in the grass, muttering something about holy water cleansing the land. The dryness in my mouth and the pounding in my skull intensified as the seizure peaked. The next few moments felt unreal. My consciousness dipped in and out. I heard chanting, a desperate kind of fevered mania. Hands grabbed at my shoulders, my arms, pressing me into the grass. My body jerked. Someone was yelling. Satan's influence must be cast out. Another voice insisted. Demonic infiltration is real. We must act fast. I tried to scream, but it came out garbled, lost in the chaos. Harriet's cries for reason ricocheted off the madness. "Stop! You're hurting her. Let her breathe." But the circle around me tightened. I smelled the freshly cut lawn, the sweat of fear, the tang of something like incense. My mind reeled, a disoriented swirl. There was no gentle reassurance. Number 911 call being made, not that I could hear. Instead, they pressed me to the ground in a mockery of concern, chanting louder, as if volume alone could evict a so-called demon. At some point, the muscular convulsions began to subside. I lay on the grass, exhausted, my head throbbing, my body weak. The chanting dulled to low murmurs. It was Harriet's voice, trembling with fury, that finally seemed to break through. "She's coming out of it. Someone call the paramedics now." I managed to roll onto my side, gasping for air. My vision remained spotty, and I could barely comprehend the circle of faces looking down at me. Some appeared enthralled, as though they had just participated in a holy rite. Others looked unsure, even a bit horrified at what they'd done. Patricia knelt, reaching out with trembling hands. But her expression held triumph, as though she believed they had done me a grand favor by performing their haphazard exorcism. I wanted to shout at them, to tell them how dangerously wrong this was. But the words wouldn't form. My entire body felt like lead. Harriet rushed over, shoving Patricia aside. "Move!" she snapped, pressing 2 fingers to my neck to check my pulse. Then her stern eyes scanned the circle. "No more praying, no more nonsense. We need proper medical help, not your bizarre ritual." Patricia bristled. "We did what was necessary." She was in the clutches of a malevolent force. "The paramedics won't handle that." Harriet snapped back. She was having a seizure, you misguided fool. A stunned hush fell over the group. I felt a wave of gratitude for Harriet that almost brought tears to my eyes, if I'd had the energy to cry. In the silence, reality seemed to intrude on the fervor. Roger shuffled his feet, exchanging uneasy glances with Linda. Seconds later, Harriet had her phone to her ear, calling for an ambulance. Patricia hovered, uncertain, but still clutching that conviction in her eyes that this was no ordinary ailment. I drifted back and forth between consciousness, my gaze wandering toward the perfectly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds, an ironic backdrop for the madness that had just taken place. And that was how I learned, the hard way, that some in Arcadia Springs genuinely believed in exorcism over first aid. How had I not seen the signs? Maybe I had, but I hadn't grasped how deep the delusion ran. Before I could fully process the horror of what they'd just done, the paramedics arrived, at last. They rushed in, pushing aside frightened neighbors, shining a flashlight into my eyes, checking my vitals, asking urgent questions. I was still too shaken to respond, but Harriet answered on my behalf. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I caught one final glimpse of Patricia, her face pale. A glimmer of doubt marred her stony conviction. But as I was whisked away, I suspected that doubt wouldn't be enough to keep this from escalating further. Because in Arcadia Springs, the line between well-intended community standards and dangerous fanaticism had officially vanished. The ride to the hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, oxygen masks, and urgent voices. Though my seizure had ended, the aftershocks rattled my body. Each bump in the road sent a dull ache through my muscles. My mind raced, replaying what had happened, disbelief at the forefront. They tried to exorcise me. Even thinking the words felt absurd, like something out of a medieval tale. Harriet rode with me in the ambulance. She refused to leave my side. While the paramedics tended to me, she briefed them on the bizarre circumstances that had led to the call. One of them, a burly man with a mustache, exchanged a stunned glance with his partner. They thought she was possessed? In this day and age, he said under his breath. I would have laughed if I hadn't felt so weak. A bitter part of me wanted to quip that these people were dangerously stuck in some alternate reality. But I held my tongue, saving my energy for the tests and questions that would surely come once we reached the hospital. After a few hours in the ER, blood tests, and 4 for fluids, a monitoring period, the doctors concluded I'd experienced a breakthrough seizure, likely triggered by a combination of stress and insufficient medication levels. They prescribed a slight dosage adjustment, recommended rest, and assured me I'd be fine. Harriet slumped in a plastic chair by my bedside, relief washing over her face as she listened to the doctor's reassurances. It's best you have someone around for the next 24 hours just to monitor you, the doctor advised. Friend, family member, someone who won't mind staying close. Harriet volunteered before I could even look her way. I'll stay with her, she declared firmly. No way I'm letting her go back to that house alone. I gave her a grateful nod. A wave of warmth spread through my chest. Though Harriet and I had known each other briefly, the shared horror of that afternoon had forged a deep bond between us. When we returned home, the sun was setting, painting the manicured lawns of Arcadia Springs in a golden hue. Nothing looked out of place. All the houses were just as neat as ever. Yet I felt an invisible tension in the air, like a hush after a gunshot. Harriet and I barely spoke as she escorted me inside. Once the door closed behind us, I exhaled deeply, relief at being off the street, mixing with a lingering sense of dread. An hour later, there was a soft knock. Harriet answered, and I heard her hushed argument with someone. A minute later, Patricia stepped into my living room. Gone was the stern posture I was used to seeing. She looked frazzled, clutching a folder of paperwork. Her eyes flicked to me, lying on the couch with a blanket over my legs. Marlene, I just wanted to see how you're doing, Patricia said, wringing her hands as if she had no clue what to do with them. I brought some reading material. She extended the folder, which bore the HOA logo. I arched an eyebrow. Reading material? Unless it's a medical text on epilepsy, I'm not sure I'm interested. Harriet chimed in, arms folded. She needs rest, Patricia. Not more rules or regulations. Patricia cleared her throat. This isn't about rules. Well, we have a subcommittee that deals with spiritual well-being. I wanted to share some pamphlets just to help you understand what we believe happened today. A surge of anger flared in me, but I struggled to contain it. Patricia, what happened today was a seizure. A medical event. Your subcommittee's beliefs nearly stopped me from getting proper care. Patricia's cheeks reddened, though her expression remained defensive. We were trying to help, she insisted. We feared for your soul. Harriet rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You pinned her to the ground and chanted gibberish while she convulsed. That's not help. It's hysteria. Patricia's voice trembled, equal parts shame and stubbornness. I admit it might have looked extreme, but some of us truly believe that certain illnesses are the work of dark forces. We prayed in good faith. We wanted to save you from something worse. I paused, trying not to lose my temper. Here stood the woman who, hours earlier, had allowed a group of neighbors to hold me down instead of calling 911. And she still held onto the notion that a demon was behind it all. You realize that if Harriet hadn't intervened, I might have suffered a worse outcome, lack of oxygen or injuries for being restrained. Patricia swallowed hard, visibly torn. Some of the board members are upset, she said in a quiet voice. They think we went too far. There's talk about complaints and lawsuits. Good, Harriet shot back. They should be upset, and there might very well be legal consequences. This was reckless endangerment. I watched Patricia's lips tighten at Harriet's words. Yet a flicker of remorse passed over her face. She turned to me again. I don't want any harm to come to you, Marlene. I truly believed we were doing the right thing. Maybe we were misguided. But you have to understand, she trailed off, searching for the right words. We don't have all the facts sometimes. It can be scary when we see something we can't explain. I sighed, feeling a pang of empathy despite my anger. I understand fear, but what you did was dangerous. You can't just assume spiritual causes for everything and ignore basic medical protocols. Patricia nodded, eyes downcast. She set the folder of pamphlets on my coffee table, but I couldn't muster the energy to reach for them. Her shoulders sagged. I suppose you'll file a complaint, maybe even sue the HOA. I can't blame you. Her admission surprised me. Earlier, she'd seemed so certain of her convictions. Now, I saw cracks in her armor, though whether they were from genuine regret or fear of legal repercussions, I couldn't be sure. I glanced at Harriet, whose eyes said, "Don't let them off easy." And she was right. What they'd done was inexcusable, but I was also exhausted. The idea of launching a legal battle felt daunting. I need time to process all this. I managed exhaustion pressing in on me. Right now, I need rest. Patricia gave a short nod. I understand. If you need anything, just let me know. She shot Harriet a half-hearted glance, then slipped out the door. Harriet locked it behind her. She turned to me, arms dropping to her sides. What do you want to do? Press charges? File a lawsuit? I closed my eyes, my headache throbbing. I don't know, I admitted quietly. Yes, part of me wants to hold them accountable. Another part of me just wants peace. This wasn't some accident. They truly believe in demons. Fighting them in court might only make them dig in deeper. Harriet sighed, moving to sit beside me. We'll figure it out, she said gently. For now, rest. You've been through enough for one day. And so we let it be for the moment. Harriet helped me get comfortable, made me dinner, and eventually settled onto the armchair to keep watch through the night. As I drifted off, I couldn't stop thinking about Patricia's eyes, haunted and uncertain. And I wondered just how many in Arcadia Springs shared her beliefs. Enough to pose a continued threat? Or had the day's events opened their eyes to the need for real understanding and compassion? In a community so fixated on outward perfection, acknowledging flaws, especially internal ones, might be a step too far. And if they refused to see sense, I had to decide whether I would fight back or cut my losses. Either way, I knew this wasn't the end. It was merely the calm after the storm, and I had a feeling another one was brewing on the horizon. For weeks, I lived in a state of uneasy truce with the HOA. Harriet stayed with me for the first few days, making sure I was stable and helping me manage everyday tasks. After she returned to her own home, she still dropped by regularly, bringing groceries or just popping in for a chat. I tried to resume a normal routine, editing manuscripts on my desk, walking Penny in the evenings, but something felt irreparably changed in Arcadia Springs. Every time I stepped onto my porch, I braced for suspicious stares or hushed whispers. Yet something strange occurred. A number of neighbors approached me quietly, apologizing in hushed tones for what had happened. Some admitted they'd been swept up in the moment, too fearful to question the circle of chanting. Others confessed they hadn't even realized I was ill. They thought it was some kind of dramatic demonstration. Still others said they'd been in the crowd, but had stayed on the outskirts, too intimidated by Patricia's authority to intervene. I listened to them with mixed emotions, gratitude that they regretted it, frustration that they let it happen in the first place, and a strong desire simply to move on. But their guilt pointed to a deeper problem. Patricia and a core group of her most ardent supporters held incredible sway over the community. Many residents felt they couldn't speak freely for fear of fines or ostracism. Meanwhile, Harriet, true to her fiery spirit, wrote a detailed complaint to the HOA board, citing reckless endangerment and demanding a formal apology and an official change in protocol for medical emergencies. To her surprise, she wasn't alone. Paul, the friendly older gentleman I'd met at the social, also lodged a complaint, along with a few of the neighbors who had apologized to me privately. Their letters forced a board meeting to address the incident. I received an invitation, this time not in a neat white envelope, but as a phone call directly from Roger, who sounded anxious. "We'd like you to come to the next board meeting and share your perspective," he said. "It's important we understand fully what happened." I hesitated, but Harriet urged me to accept. "They need to hear from you," she argued. "If you don't speak up, they'll just sweep it under the rug." So, on a humid Thursday evening, I found myself in the clubhouse again. A smaller, more formal gathering this time. No pastries, no pastel polos. Instead, a row of tables faced a few chairs set aside for anyone addressing the board. Patricia, as president, sat in the center. Her face was unreadable, hands folded on the table. Roger flanked her, along with two other members, Linda and a woman named Sherry. The seats behind me slowly filled with curious onlookers, neighbors who wanted to see how this would play out. The meeting began with perfunctory agenda items, budget approvals, minor landscaping updates. My foot tapped anxiously, waiting for the real reason we were all there. Finally, Roger cleared his throat. "Now, the board would like to address the matter involving Ms. Marlene Wilson," he began, voice trembling slightly. "As many of you know, there was an incident during the yard beautification tour." "Incident?" Harriet repeated from behind me. "It was more than an incident." Roger's cheeks flushed. "Yes, of course. A medical emergency occurred, and it was mishandled. Ms. Wilson has been invited to speak." "Marlene." He gestured to me. I stood, my legs wobbly. The hush was suffocating. I glanced at Harriet, who nodded encouragingly. Then I turned to the board. "A few weeks ago, I had a seizure," I began, voice tight. Instead of calling for professional medical help right away, several people, including members of this board, claimed it was demonic possession and performed a so-called exorcism. I'm here tonight to make it clear that what happened was dangerous and unacceptable. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Patricia's gaze flicked to her folded hands. Roger stared at his notes. Linda kept her eyes closed as though in prayer. "This board's duty is to the well-being of the community," I continued. "And by ignoring a genuine medical crisis, you put me in harm's way. I'm asking for two things: a written apology and an assurance that you'll never again delay or discourage someone from calling 911 in a medical emergency." Harriet's voice rose from behind me. "I also request that a mandatory training session be implemented so everyone here knows the basics of first aid. No more pray first fiascos." For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Patricia looked up. She began slowly. I acknowledge that we mishandled the situation." She hesitated, swallowing hard. "In Arcadia Springs, many of us have strong spiritual beliefs, but it's clear now that our approach can't take precedence over medical urgency." I could almost feel Harriet's satisfaction at hearing Patricia say those words. Still, I sensed reluctance in Patricia's tone. She seemed torn, glancing at Roger as if to gauge his reaction before speaking further. Roger chimed in, voice subdued. We do want to apologize for the distress caused. We never intended to harm you, Marlene. I inhaled, relief and a lingering frustration mingling in my chest. An apology means little without concrete changes, I replied. So, what's to stop this from happening again? Patricia drew in a long breath. We will draft an official policy stating that in cases of observed medical distress, 911 is to be called immediately. No exceptions. And we'll arrange for a community first aid seminar. The subcommittee on spiritual well-being, her voice quavered, will be asked to respect these guidelines. A subdued applause rose from a few neighbors. Harriet's hand found my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze of encouragement. I stood silent, letting the weight of the moment settle. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step towards sanity. After the meeting, a handful of residents approached, offering supportive words. I'm so sorry for what you went through, one woman whispered, eyes glistening. I'm glad you spoke up. Paul nodded in agreement, patting my arm. You're braver than you know, kiddo. Patricia lingered at the table, stacking paperwork. I approached her, uncertain what I might say. She beat me to it. I hope you'll stay, she said softly, meeting my gaze. I know you've been considering leaving. We don't want to lose you. Maybe we can make it right. I sighed, remembering the dream of a peaceful life I had when I first arrived. I'll think about it. Then, with a small nod, I turned and left Harriet by my side. As we walked into the balmy evening, I took in the neat rows of houses, the soft glow of porch lights, and the hush of manicured lawns. Arcadia Springs hadn't lost its veneer of perfection, but now I knew how fragile that veneer was. Underneath, fear and superstition had nearly cost me my health, or worse. Yet, in facing that ordeal, I'd also found genuine community among those who were willing to confront the HOA's extremes. That night, I returned to my home, Penny wagging her tail in greeting. Harriet gave me a parting hug, promising to check on me the next day. I stepped inside, closed the door, and let out a long breath. The echoes of the seizure, the chanting, the paramedics, they were all part of my memory now. But they no longer held me captive. I stood up for myself. I demanded better. And maybe, just maybe, Arcadia Springs would be a safer, more compassionate place because of it. I settled on a couch, Penny curling up beside me. Outside, the neighborhood was still. I no longer felt as though countless eyes were watching me with suspicion. Perhaps tomorrow would bring more stumbles, more confusion, or more attempts to drag me into the board's fervor. But for now, there was quiet. And in that quiet, a small seed of hope took root. That sometimes, when people are forced to see the danger in their beliefs, they can learn to prioritize empathy over dogma. It wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But at least I'd found allies, like Harriet, willing to call out injustice. And if the HOA ever again tried to let superstition override a medical crisis, they'd know someone would stand up against them. In the end, I realized the real demon in Arcadia Springs wasn't living inside me. It was fear and ignorance. And maybe, with determination and understanding, that demon could finally be exorcised for good.